Knock knock.
Who's there?
M. Night Shyamalan's best film since 2016.
Um, okay, I know you're gonna finish the joke here, but I need to actually see who this is, like, right now. Let's peek through the curtains just a
Wait,
little
let me
bit.
finish the joke. Oh, jeez.
What's going on, everyone? James here with another real review, and today we're gonna get into all of my spoiler-free thoughts on Knock at the Cabin. Thanks so much to Universal Pictures for giving me the chance to watch this early in theaters for review, and you can too on February 3rd. So this weekend is going to be M. Night's weekend. I can see this movie going to the top of the box office. It is a thriller. It's not a horror movie, but it's rated R for a reason, even though they do tend to hold back a little bit in some regards. But we'll talk about that soon in my review. Now, if you don't know much about the film, well, again, it's directed by M. Night Shyamalan, so you can expect things to get a little kooky sometimes. It's starring Dave Bautista, one of the brightest actors in the game, the best wrestler turned actor in my opinion. And then, of course, you have Jonathan Groff, who is a legend in his own right, Ben Aldridge, Kristen, and Nikki Amuka-Bird, and I was actually really happy to see her name in the opening credits. Now, again, it's based on a book, right? So I don't want to spoil anything for the non-book readers like myself, so I can just summarize at least the premise of the film like this. While vacationing, a girl and her parents are taken hostage by armed strangers who demand that the family make a choice to avert the apocalypse. And yep, that's probably the kooky part that I was talking about earlier. I mean, the apocalypse, really, I avoided every trailer. I went in cold because I saw every trailer for Old, and then my expectations were a little subverted. They were a little altered because I watched the trailer for Knock at the Cabin, and let me put it this way. It's not as exciting as the trailer, but again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before we get into my positives, my negatives, and my final thoughts, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies, TV, and all the news in between. So if you do too, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell, y'all. Get loud in the comments and let me know which M. Night Shyamalan movie is your favorite. I almost wonder if anyone is going to bring up The Village, a movie I still have yet to see it. I gotta get on that. But guys, let's waste no more time and let's talk about Knock at the Cabin and why, in my opinion, it is the best M. Night Shyamalan film since 2016's Split. Even though M. Night Shyamalan movies are very hit and miss for me, this one wasn't really a miss. It's very atmospheric. It's not a horror movie in the slightest. Like I mentioned, there are some thrills, but it's more of a psychological thriller than anything. And that's the expectation you got to go into this movie with, because if you were going in looking for an over-the-top horror film, you're going to be disappointed. So many guests at this screening walked out thinking it was the worst movie they're probably going to see all year because they were expecting something big, scary, something like Signs, and that's really not what Knock at the Cabin is in any regard. But where my eyes went to immediately when I heard about this film was the cast he assembled, and to be honest, by the end of this film, I'm a big fan of how he assembled this cast and crew because it really does help the movie work a little bit better. There are some strong lead performances here in this movie. For the most part, you're in a single setting, right? You're in a cabin. You're with 4 strangers and you're with a family of 3. So you're getting to know them through exposition, but it's the performances here that really help this movie chug along much better than if it were any other cast. Let's begin with Jonathan Groff, who plays Eric. He's husband to Andrew, who's played by Ben Aldridge, and this duo did a great job. I mean, there's an insane amount of emotion that goes into both of these roles, and the way that these characters are written, they needed to have high capacity, high emotional capacity to play these roles well, and I do believe Jonathan Groff and Ben Aldridge, they really do succeed at both of those things. Now, what I will say is that Jonathan Groff, in my opinion, is probably putting in a little bit of a better performance, but that's because his character is much more nuanced, and you can tell he's being swayed just a little bit. That's all I'll say about that. But man, it is just a joy to see Jonathan Groff in this role, and Ben Aldridge, who does a really good job, because man's got a short fuse, and Ben Aldridge really brings that across very naturally, organically, and it's believable. That's the big thing, is the performances are believable here. But another name that jumps up to one of the standouts for me is Nikki Amuka-Bird, who plays Sabrina. Now, she's a nurse, and I'm not saying anything else, but I will say this character is grounded. Probably the most grounded character, as odd as that sounds, especially when you find out about who she's rolling with. But yeah, I do think that she is able to ground the movie and bring a very human approach to the situation. Yeah. And then there is the one actor that I'm sure everyone's going to be talking about after this movie, and that is Dave Bautista as Leonard. Now look, y'all, his performance took some time to work for me. I was always going in thinking Dave Bautista is going to crush it, because his past work has proven that he's a good actor with range. Look at Blade Runner 2049, for example. But I think his performance took a little long for me to understand in a way. And then I thought, oh, he's playing the role not because... It's not monotone because he is monotone. It's monotone because the character of Leonard is not necessarily a three-dimensional character. And I think that's what made me respect the role a little bit more. But I will say that his performance eventually clicked. It's not his best, but it clicked for me. But my absolute favorite performance in Knock at the Cabin, and the most compelling to me, is Kristen Chu's as Wen. She plays the daughter to Andrew and Eric. Honestly, I know there are a lot of good child actors out there nowadays, but Kristen Chu is doing such great work in Knock at the Cabin that I literally said after the film, I just want to see her in more things. Like, she is so good at conveying this sense of innocence, dread, maturity, because for her age, she's very smart and capable. And then I also think that she's very witty in this movie as well. Her line delivery, there was nothing unnatural about her line delivery. It felt very... I don't know, it felt very flowy, if that is a word that I can use here. It kind of just went in and out, and she just was able to help the narrative move forward. Now, I will say that there were times where her character does take a back seat to everybody, and that makes sense because she's not the big name draw here, but she does steal scenes from her co-stars at times. I mean, even in the intro scene, she pretty much stole the scene from Dave Bautista's character, and I think that is an incredible feat. So Kristen Chu, amazing job. Now, outside of the performances themselves, there's a technical element to this movie that is actually pretty darn impressive. And I know M. Night Shyamalan movies usually have decent cinematography, but here, man, the cinematography was really gripping. I loved what Jaron Blaschke, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, and Lowell A. Meyer did with how they framed every scene. You're in a cabin for majority of the film, but it feels like they were able to get angles here that made you feel like you were shifting locations when you're really just in one spot. So there's a dynamic approach to this. I loved the usage of extreme close-up shots, and then of course the background's very blurred out, so what you're getting is the raw emotion on a character's face. And it's really cool to see that each character had this emotional tinge about them. I mean, they cried so much in this movie, but it worked. And then there's the score here by Herodis Steffen's daughter, and it was solid. Also, the score at times was the only reason I was engaged with the scene. This movie does use the news to tell the story sometimes, like a news report, several news reports, and usually in movies that kind of takes me out. But the reason I was drawn in is because we were hearing the sounds in the film, right? We were hearing the news report, and then you would hear the score coupled on top of it, and it made it all that much more compelling. I was able to really buy in to how the story was being told, even though it was through a news report. So there are many elements of this film that are kind of creepy too, that the score really aids. It just gives it another layer. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought the score here helped save certain scenes, because there were times where I was just getting a little tired of what the movie was giving to us, and not in the best way. So maybe that is a good segue to the negatives, because with all those positives, I have to say that this isn't a miss for M. Night Shyamalan, but it's not great either. I found that the writing was the biggest blemish for Knock at the Cabin. The dialogue shared between our characters is too often on the nose and forced. I mean, there's even a conversation in the first act of the movie where I thought, okay, that's definitely, you're saying that through your teeth. You know what I mean? The movie wastes no time getting into the action, which is great, but with that, you know, there's a lot of exposition that kind of follows. There's an element of this story that very, very closely ties to the book of Revelation and the Bible. And there are elements of that that made me kind of predict the ending anyway. And then the movie goes out of its way to overtly say that this is a tie to the book of Revelation. I don't want to spoil anything. I don't want to kind of say where they draw the inspiration from exactly in the book of Revelation, but for the most part I was like, this is a little on the nose. You know, I have no issue with the allegory here, but at the same time it just wasn't written in a way that felt natural. It was almost a little hollow. And if you are an audience member that's coming into this looking to be scared, you're going to be severely disappointed, because for the most part, guys, it's these 4 captors talking to Eric, Andrew, and Wen. And that's all it is. So sometimes it's just a simple 2-shot, you know, and it's just a lot of talking, and sometimes it could get a little boring, and I can understand why people would get bored by that, because at times I also kind of got annoyed with the pacing of the film, which is the next negative here, because the pacing does get in the way of this movie really getting to that next level. By the second act, the formula really ran its course, and I was seemingly waiting for something to happen. And when it finally did, it did feel like a nice change of pace towards the third act, but for about 10 minutes, that's all it lasted, just 10 minutes. And then they went right back to the same formula again. I don't necessarily know why M. Night Shyamalan decided to take this approach, because when you're adapting a book, of course you have creative liberty, should be different from the book, shouldn't be page by page a carbon copy. But I mean, I don't know, is this how the book was also written? Because you have like this action moment, right, in the last half of the film, but it's so quick that it doesn't necessarily give me any sort of like relief from the previous formula. I knew it was coming again, and then of course sit down and they talk again, and I'm like, guys, can we just kind of move on from this? I want a different change of pace, and that's what I was waiting for. And unfortunately it comes a little too late, and then the movie ends. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but you can definitely tell that the pacing of the movie got in the way of the film sort of evolving. And then there's the issue I have with the story itself. I mean, it just really became dull. They try to spice up the monotony, you know, with some kills. That's all I'll say about that. But even then, that happens quickly and you don't see it. For a rated R film, the fact that you're not seeing it, I thought was kind of weird. For a minute, I almost had to pinch myself and say, are we in a PG-13 movie? Or are we in a rated R? Because if we're in a rated R film, it's only because they said the F word a few more times than you're supposed to. Because other than that, you're not really showing anything. The movie does try to take a break from the conversations in the cabin by giving us these flashback moments. They're very brief with Andrew and Eric to give them some backstory and context to why they love Wen so much and each other. But for the most part, it just is too short, and it's not as sweet as I thought it would be. Although there is one scene, one flashback scene, where it just reveals exactly what I needed to know about the ending, and I thought to myself, yeah, I know what's gonna happen, and it did. So my last negative here before we get into my final thoughts is this. The movie's ending is very different from the book's ending. Now, is that a negative? Well, sort of. It's like a half negative, because I do like that he changed the book's ending. I went and I read the ending of the book, and I thought to myself, thank goodness he changed it, because that would have really took me out of the film completely and broke all the immersion or goodwill that M. Night Shyamalan had earned up to that point. But there is an element of the book's ending that I almost wish was included in the actual film. It would have crushed me. but unfortunately, that wasn't kept in, and that was what I was almost waiting for. There wasn't a moment in this movie that I can say crushed me, but in the book's ending, there is one moment where I thought, ooh, okay, that would have broke my heart. So with all of that being said, my final thoughts on Knock on the Cabin are that it's really not bad, but it's not great either. This is more of like a mid-tier M. Night Shyamalan movie for me. What I consider his top tier are movies like Signs, The Sixth Sense, and Split. But for me, this film, Knock at the Cabin, just falls underneath it because there are elements that really work well. Like the performances are solid. There are some actors here with incredible range. I mean, yes, there are some actors that also get shafted. I mean, Rupert Grint is in this movie, and he's like hardly used. And it was so disappointing to see him underused in this movie. But for the most part, I do love what they did with the cast and crew because, like I said, it's a decent directorial approach from M. Night Shyamalan. Some elements, again, he gets in his own way. But I love the score and I love the cinematography. But then you look on the other side, right? And I'm thinking about everything that held me back from loving this movie, and the negatives are just too glaring. So this is a movie where if you go in with proper expectations, you'll probably think, oh man, it's not that bad. Kind of like me. But if you go in with your expectations sky high, you're looking for the biggest twist in the world, yeah, you're going to walk out of this cabin pretty disappointed. So I would probably give Knock at the Cabin a 3 out of 5. Again, not the worst thing in the world, but so far in 2023, it's the best movie I've seen. So there's that. I mean, I don't know what that says about the rest of the movies I've seen in 2023 so far, but for the most part, the movie's not bad. Is it one you rush out to the theater for? Maybe not, unless you really are looking for the immersion that you can only really get in a theater. But other than that, if you do wait to watch it on a rainy weekend on Peacock, you might actually find yourself enjoying it a little bit more than if you were to take your time to get out to a theater. So with all that being said, again, that's my spoiler-free review of Knock at the Cabin. I am not against this film. I just don't love it. You know, it's not bad, but I'm in the middle on Knock at the Cabin. But I want to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Let me know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, or if you kind of are in the middle like me. And hit the big red button below and subscribe for more real reviews, reactions, and all that news in between, just like this. Guys, this was fun, more fun than I thought, because if you saw my old review, I was not a fan. Knock at the Cabin, though, it ain't bad. Alrighty, y'all. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening. Is he at the door again? He's at the door again.